Hey everyone, check out what was just dropped off at my place. And no, I didn't buy this. It's not a new project vehicle of mine. This one is here for a repair job. And because this is a pretty cool and unusual and by now also pretty rare vehicle, I figured I would take you guys along for this, hopefully small project. So this thing is a Mercedes T2 406D, also nicknamed the Düsseldorfer. And this one is from 1973, so it is just over 50 years old. And these vans, they were made in many different configurations. There was long models and tall models and flatbeds. They had different engines, different drivetrains, different axles, with or without four-wheel drive, and so on. This one was originally owned by the Norwegian Civil Defense, which is very clear by this bright orange color and the big blue triangle. Well, it's mostly peeled off, but you can clearly tell it was there. And also, it would have had some nice big clear text saying Civil Defense, or in this case, Civilforsvaret. And all of the Civil Defense vehicles had this same color scheme, the bright orange with the blue triangle, and it was for the same reason as the Red Cross vehicles are white with a big red cross on it. This was so that in a wartime situation, the enemy would hopefully not bomb out these clearly not military vehicles. The civil defense was something that a lot of countries established in the years right after World War II. And the thinking was that in a wartime situation, the regular civilian fire department would just not be able to keep up with bombed out buildings and destroyed infrastructure and bringing out supplies and all that stuff. And so they established these civil defenses that were to take care of those more engineered part of things in such a situation. And much like the fire departments, the civil defense also consisted of volunteers that would be able to move out in such a situation. But let's get back to the issue that this thing has, because I don't know exactly what it is. I've been told that it is leaking quite a bit of coolant, and the owner thought it was bad enough that he didn't want to risk anything by driving it here, so that's why it was delivered on a tow truck. And this is also the very first time I'm even seeing this vehicle in person. So I really don't know the vehicle itself, and I also don't know how bad the problem is. That's why I didn't want to just jump in and start it up. So that's why we pulled it away with the Suzuki so that the tow truck driver could get back out. And I'm just going to go over this real quick before we fire it up and drive it into the workshop. Now, of course, if it is just low on coolant, it would have been perfectly fine to start it up and drive it this little bit. It's not going to overheat that quickly. But again, I don't know how bad the problem really is, so I would just like to have a quick look just to see that nothing is terribly wrong. And another reason that I thought this vehicle would be interesting for this channel is because it has almost the exact same OM615 engine that we have in the little Unimog 421. So we're already a bit familiar with this thing. And actually, that's exactly why he sent it out to me. So I don't see any water splashed all over the engine room here. The radiator is full of water. Huh. Okay. Maybe the leak is not that bad after all. I don't see anything immediately catastrophic anywhere. The belt is still on there nice and tight. Okay. Well, maybe it's not that bad after all. Let's just try and fire this thing up and get it inside then. Should also just mention that this one has been converted into a camper. And personally, I think it is perfect for exactly that. But out of respect for the owner, I am not going to go digging into his camper setup and show you all of that stuff in detail. So these things are pretty simple. They are set up a lot like other German commercial vehicles of these years. And first off, the battery is right under the driver's seat, and there is a battery disconnect right down here on this side. Took me a moment to find that one. Now with that on, the ignition switch is a bit unusual because as soon as you put the key in and press down, ignition is on. These next two turns are for the lights. So the first turn is for your parking lights or marker lights, and the next turn is for your driving lights. I don't need driving lights or anything for this, so we'll just leave it in 0, but that is still ignition on. And then you just have your combined start, stop, and also glow plug button here. So when it's all down, it is stopped, so that's how you turn it off. you pull it out, and well, that's just neutral position, and it is spring loaded, so when you pull up on this, the glow plugs are now on. And on these old ones, it takes quite a while, so you're gonna have to hold it there for 10 to 20 seconds. And you have this little glow wire in here. When that starts glowing red, they are definitely ready. I can feel the heat coming off this wire, so I think we're ready, and we just pull it up that last little bit. And then everything starts to rattle. So I should just say that all I have been told, or rather shown, was a picture of the engine from down there with water running down from it. And I told them right away that it's probably coming from the water pump. And I can see that just from driving in here, we've left a little drippy trail, and we are starting to make a little bit of a puddle down here. So let's just go right ahead and have a look. And it looks like my suspicions are confirmed. The water is coming out of that little drain hole at the bottom of the water pump. So that means that the seal around the shaft in the pump itself has gone bad. So luckily that should be a fairly straightforward project. Now it might be possible to take that pump off and reseal it, but honestly they are not very expensive and easily available, so it makes more sense to just replace it. But before we just go ahead and dig into all of that, he also mentioned a few other things that was bothering him. One of them being that the temperature gauge was not very accurate, or maybe it wasn't reading at all. I'm not really sure. But since we're gonna have to drain the water out anyway, we might as well take a quick look at that as well. Now this leak is not bad enough that I'm really concerned about running this for a little bit. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna run this up to temperature, keeping an eye on that gauge to try and figure out exactly what it's doing. However, I know we just drove it inside, but I don't really want to be standing around in that smoke, so I'm just going to drive it out again. So I'm going to run this thing out here for a bit and keep my eye on it as it gets up to temperature. And also, once in a while, I'm going to feel the hoses running to and from the radiator, just to check if it is letting hot water through that too soon, because the problem could also be that it's just never getting up to temperature if the thermostat is not closing. It might just be the thermostat, because the radiator is already getting warm. It's only been idling here for like 5 minutes. Got 39 degrees on that. And 25 degrees on the other end. That is getting warm too soon. I think the thermostat is not closing correctly. Now, if that thermostat is the issue, it's never going to get warm just from idling, so I'm just going to give it just a little bit more than idle, not a whole lot. Just enough to build some heat. It's only done 57,000 kilometers. That's really not bad. He did tell me that this has been sitting for quite a while before he got it, so that's another good reason that the thermostat would be stuck if it just simply hasn't been moving for a long time. Alright, so I've been at it for a little while and it is just not getting hot. It is cooling way too much for how little it's doing, so I'm pretty sure the thermostat is not closing. Now, I would really like to get it up to temperature just to make sure that it's not the temperature sending unit itself. Normally, you would just drive this just to bring the temperature up, but because it has a water leak, I don't really want to drive too far, so what I'm going to do is just block off the radiator. Now, this actually does have one of those old school rolling shutters that you can pull up in front of the radiator. but it doesn't look like it's in the best condition, so I'm not going to mess with that. I'm simply just going to shove a piece of cardboard in front of the radiator. I needed 2 hands for this. Alright, now it seems like we're getting somewhere. The temperature gauge just went up a little bit. So now the temperature up there by the sensor should be something like 50, 60 degrees. So let's see, 66 down there by the temperature sensor. And the radiator is 60 degrees. That should not be getting hot yet. See the return hose down here? That is over 47. So it's definitely letting the water through the radiator too soon. So it seems the electrical part of it is all right. The engine has just simply been running too cold because the thermostat doesn't close. So now we know we got to replace that as well while we're in there. Now that didn't really make the leak any better. But before I go ahead and order parts for that, let's just see if there's something else we need. Because he did mention a few other things that he would really like if I could take a look at that as well now that it's here. And one of those issues is the fuel gauge, because that's just showing full all the time. Or actually, right now it's showing empty, but when I go and put the ignition on, it jumps right to full. And that tells me 2 things right away. First of all, it tells me that the gauge itself is most likely working all right because it does move. And also it tells me that there is a disconnected wire somewhere in this circuit, most likely in the sending unit itself. Reason I think that is because all this gauge really does is showing you the electrical resistance in that circuit. And the resistance in the sending unit is going up as the sending unit is going up with the fuel. But the biggest resistance you can have in an electrical circuit is, of course, a disconnected wire, because that's just unlimited resistance. So that's why it's jumping all the way up like that. So let's just get right in here and have a look at the tank. You can hardly see what I'm doing down here. Anyway, you have the feed and return lines going into the side of the tank. That's a little bit unusual. But the wire here running up to the sending unit is still running to the top of it. And unfortunately, there is no floor hatch or anything else that would grant me easy access to this. So looks like I'm gonna have to take this down just to have a look at that sending unit. Problem is, I don't know how much fuel is in here, so this thing might be a bit heavy. It's coming down. Let's just open this up because we might just be able to get to it through here. Yeah, it's right here. Nice. Get down a little bit more. There we go. Perfect. All right, so this is good enough that I can get to the sending unit through this hole for the filler cap right here. That's it right there. This wire that is connected in the middle of it right here, that is the one running up to the gauge. There is another wire connected over here, and that is just the ground. Now all I'm gonna do is just with my screwdriver, I'm just gonna short this out to ground like that. And then I'm gonna keep an eye on the gauge up there and see what it does. But of course I can't really see the gauge while doing this, so I'm gonna set the camera up to have a look at that, then you guys can see what's happening as well. Right, so we have ignition on and the gauge is showing full, so I'm going to short this out now. Alright, so you saw that needle jump down to empty when I shorted this out, so that means that, as expected, the problem is in the sending unit. And really, 9 times out of 10 when you have an issue like this, it is the sending unit, because that's just the one that has the most difficult life down here in the tank. Alright, so before I go ahead and dig into all of that, I'm going to go and order some parts so that I have everything I need before I start taking things apart. So I'm going to get back to this in a couple of days. So it has been quite a few days, but I've been getting some of the stuff that I need to fix up this orange box, so let's just get to it. So I'm just going to go ahead and start with this fuel sending unit, just so I can get that tank back up and bolted in place. Because right now it is just partially hanging by the fuel lines. It's not really ideal like this, so I would like to get that back up there. Hopefully I'll be able to do all I need to do through this little fuel filler hatch right here. I'm not quite sure if there's going to be enough room to get it in and out of there, but I'm going to give it a try because it would be really nice if I don't have to completely drop the tank, because it turns out there actually is quite a bit of fuel in it. And because I am working through this little hole here, it's not going to be very easy for me to film what I'm doing, but there's not really a whole lot to it. I am just unbolting this. Yes, it's going to be possible. Haha, nice. So before I just go and pop in the new sending unit, I just want to make sure that it all works just fine. So I put some extended wires on the connectors down here, and I have the other end of those wires up here. I'm going to attach those to the new sending unit so that I can move it around and look at the gauge at the same time. All right. Ignition, put some light on as well so you can see it. Checking out the gauge down here. We're starting at empty. We're just slowly moving up to full tank right here and back down to empty. Nice. It's all working perfectly. Let's put this in. Once again, it's not going to be too easy for you to see what I'm doing, but we are just putting it back together. New gasket in. Fiddle this down in there. Ta-da! All right, here we go. There's not too much room to move around down here. Or maybe I'm just used to my own tall vehicles. So for a final check, right, there we go. He has just over half a tank. So that is one thing taken care of. Now let's get back to the reason it actually showed up here. So I'm going to have to get the water out of this, and then I suppose the easiest thing is just going to be to take this whole front cover off and pull the radiator out, because that's going to give me so much more room to work, because I can't really do a whole lot through this tiny hatch. It might be doable to do it through here, but it's not ideal, and it's really not going to be a whole lot more work just to take this stuff off. I really appreciate when radiators have drain plugs in them. Makes it so much easier and cleaner. So to get this front piece off, I just have to take off the hood latch, and then we have these upper radiator mounts, and then this is just held on with 4 bolts. There's 2 up here at the top, and then 2 roughly in the middle. Now those are easiest to get to from out here by the wheels. They are right in there. And once that is off, I would already have the upper radiator mounts off, so I just have to remove the hoses and take the lower mounts off, and I can pull the radiator out as well. That can just hang out in here somewhere. This is one of those things you just have to feel. Can't really look in there at the same time. My own hands are going to be blocking my view. So here's this radiator shutter curtain thing that I was talking about earlier. This is something that you can roll up to block flow for the radiator if you're in a really cold environment and the vehicle is struggling to build any heat. But this doesn't look to be in the best condition, so I'm just going to see if I can gently take that off and just set it aside. It's gonna be up here somewhere. There we go. Look at how much more room we have to get in here now. And also I see now that this was certainly necessary because we would not have been able to get in and replace this without taking that radiator off. Because for some reason I was initially thinking about my Unimog engine where the fan is on a separate drive, but this is of course bolted directly to the water pump. So we certainly had to get that radiator out to be able to get to unbolt this. And as expected, the bearing in here is certainly dead. See if you can hear that. I can definitely feel the play, and that play is what is ruining the seal in there, and that's why it's leaking. But also, eventually, that bearing is just going to fall apart, and this whole thing is just going to lock up. So it's certainly time for a new water pump. See if the whole pulley is going to come off with it. It did. And I know some of you have been wondering, but I do like using just regular hand tools to at least crack loose some of these bolts, because it makes it much easier to feel if the bolt is about to break or something like that. So that way I can better prepare and do something different to try and avoid breaking those bolts. These are all fine. There we go. So here's another thing one of you guys asked at some point is if I ever use these coral discs and how I like them. Now I do like these things, and first of all I didn't know that they were called coral discs in English, but I guess it makes sense. They kind of look like a little coral thing. But I really do like them for cleaning up gasket surfaces like this. They're made from a plastic, so they are just rough enough to rub off those gasket materials, but not rough enough to really score up the metal in any way. Well, this is a bit disappointing. So as I was about to install this new water pump, I realized there is an issue with this because they have sent me the wrong one. See, there are two models of these water pumps, one with 3 bolts on the flange and one with 4 bolts. Now, most of these old Mercedes use this 4-bolt version, but some of them use this type with just 3 bolts. And that is what I ordered. I just went and double checked, but they have sent me this instead. So that's unfortunate. So I thought I was going to be clever and simply take the flange off the old pump and put that onto the new one. So after a lot of struggling to get this off, I then come to find that this shaft gets thicker just a little bit further down, where the shaft on the new pump does not. That stays the same all the way through. So that is not even going to be an option. Turns out there was no quick and easy fix for this. So really, the only option is I'm going to have to order a new pump from Germany. So this thing is going to sit in here for another few days. That wasn't really part of the plan, but that's just how it goes sometimes. All right, guys, here we are once again a few days later, and I finally got the correct 3-bolt water pump. So now we can finally go ahead and get on with this little project. Now this time I also went and got the pump from a different supplier. Mostly because it was already in stock and ready to go, so therefore a bit quicker. But also I noticed that they had this version where it has a metal impeller, just like the old original Mercedes pump. Because most of these aftermarket pumps, they have a plastic impeller, and that works just fine, but naturally being plastic, it is a little bit more sensitive if it ever encounters some debris in the cooling system. So this should be the better option, even though it was like a couple dollars more. New pump and new gasket, and in we go. Of course, we want to make sure that one of these drain holes is pointing down, and there is another one just like it down here. So normally on parts like this, I would give the bolts a little bit of copper grease or something so they won't seize up too bad. But in this case, they go all the way through and into the water chamber. So they're going to get a little bit of sealer instead. All right, so finally we have a new pump on here, so let's go ahead and take care of the last problem, which is this thermostat that I suspect is stuck open. Not nearly as much room to get to things up here, but it's doable. So as expected, this thing is just stuck open. Also, there's a bunch of dirt and stuff down here, so that's probably why. And that's why we weren't getting very hot. New O-ring on that, and plop that one in there. Now the bolts for this, they are just going to get some copper grease on here, so hopefully they won't corrode nearly as bad. And with that, we finally have all these relatively small issues taken care of, so let's go ahead and put this thing back together so we can test it out and make sure it's all good. And no, I don't torque absolutely everything, but I do think it's important, especially on engine components and moving parts. Before we go ahead and close it off completely, may as well just fill it up, make sure we don't have any leaks. Let's just go right ahead and do a little test drive, get it up to temperature, and make sure that everything is working just fine. Well, it's not a race car, that's for sure. looks like our top speed is just above 75 kilometers per hour, that is, not miles per hour. The gauges are getting a little bit foggy, but we are building temperature now, so that's really good. Now this is the first time that I've actually been driving one of these at any reasonable speed, and it's really not very fast, but I didn't expect it to. And in its defense, this is about the smallest engine that was available for these. Some of them had the OM352 engine, just like I have in my Unimog, and there was also an in-between model that was called the OM314, I believe. That was pretty much just a 4-cylinder version of the 352. And of course, both of those engines would have had a good bit more power than the little OM615 that's in this one. But despite that, it really wasn't too bad. It's just not fast, that's all. But that's really all I have for you this time around. I just wanted to bring you along for this little project. Well, partly because it's a cool old vehicle, but also just to show you that I'm not always working on trucks and 4x4s and the stuff that you normally see on this channel. So when you're wondering why some of my projects are taking so long, well, sometimes it's just because I'm working on street cars instead. But with that, I should probably just say that this is not me advertising. I'm not running a commercial shop here. I may occasionally do some of these older specialty vehicles just because I do find those interesting. But other than that, the regular cars that I work on, they tend to belong to family and friends and other relatives. But anyway, despite the relatively simple repairs, I hope you found this at least somewhat interesting. And do let me know if you would like to see some of these unusual vehicles on the channel, even though they are not off-roaders. Thank you all for watching along, and I'll see you in the next one.